G'day guys, welcome back to True Footy. Today I thought I would do a repeat of a video I did about 12 months ago, a bit of a fun one, and now that the fixture is out and all the list management stuff is out of the way, the trades, the draft, it's time to have a little think about next year. And in today's video, we're going to go through every single game of the 2025 season and try and predict the result and give us a predicted ladder. Now I am going to do a proper ladder prediction pretty soon, that should be with you not too far away. And I'd imagine that ladder prediction is probably going to be a little bit different to whatever this activity spits out, but nonetheless, it's still fun. Let's have a crack at trying to predict every single game. All right, so we're back on Squiggle, this trusty website, which allows us to predict the next 207 games plus finals. Let's get into it. Brisbane versus Geelong. All right, this is actually a pretty good game to open the season at the Gabba. Now, I'm not going to analyse every single game in depth. We don't have the time. But I'm intrigued to see how this will go. It's a rematch of the prelim. I wouldn't be surprised if Brisbane start the season slowly again. We saw that with both grand finalists last year when they both took part in opening round, and both teams started the year poorly. So that gives Geelong a sniff here, but I think I'm going to go the home side here in a good game. Just tip the favourite in a narrow win. Sydney versus Hawthorn. Oh, this one is tough because it's at the SCG. This was nearly the prelim, in fact. I don't know what to make of either of these sides. Sydney was so poor in that grand final, but I think at home, I'll back the Swans in to win by 4 goals or so. Gold Coast versus Essendon at Metricon or Heritage Bank. People's First, that's what it's called now. Probably go the home side. I expect Gold Coast to start well. I feel like they started last year well. They won in opening round. I also do rate their list, and they should be coming good soon. So let's say 18-point win to the Suns, and then another opening round rematch, really. GWS versus Collingwood. GWS won this one last time. I'm going to say Collingwood, who didn't play finals, will be better prepared for this season. I'll say the Pies win in a bit of an upset, perhaps, depending on your viewpoint, and win by 8 points. So then we go back to our normal opening round game or normal round one opener. Carlton should have a Richmond's measure, you'd think. Again, young list, Richmond, very young, a lot of new blood. They might start the season better than, the middle and the end goes. But I think you have to tip Carlton here. Let's say it'll be a good game. I feel like last year it was like 6 points or something like that. Carlton by 18. Hawthorn versus Essendon, again, another round one rematch. Essendon won this last year, but Hawthorn really went on a run after that. So is there a chance Hawthorn starts the year slowly? I think there is a chance of it, but I think you have to tip the Hawks here. I think they've done enough to earn favouritism in this game. Geelong versus Fremantle at GMHBA. Boy, oh boy. Fremantle played this ground well, but Geelong, they finished the season really strongly. And they've just added Bailey Smith. Again, he's just coming back from an ACL. So I think I'm going to tip Fremantle here. I think they'll win at GMHBA, which is a tough ask, but they've become really good at it. I'll say Fremantle win and boil over by 8 points. Sydney and the Lions at the SCG. This one is not simple. Go home side here by 3 goals. Bulldogs versus North. North could be extra dangerous towards the start of the year. Could they pull an early season boil over against the Dogs? It was close last time they met. I think I'm just going to go the Dogs here. 4 goals again. Collingwood should beat the Power at the MCG. Again, we'll keep it to 4 goals. Well, this one's tricky. I think these two teams will be hard to assess. Both teams, didn't play finals, but both also showed some really good form, particularly the Saints towards the back end of the year. But home ground advantage, I'll say the Crows win this narrowly, but that's tight. That's a really tough one. Melbourne and the Giants at the MCG. Don't know what to expect from Melbourne next year. They should be better in theory. I'll say the D's win at home by 3 goals. West Coast versus Gold Coast, tough one. I think this is winnable for West Coast. New coach, first game. Might take them a little while to, click with the system. I think West Coast can win, but I think I'll tip the Suns. I do think, though, there will be better next year and more consistent, and they'll win away, even though West Coast won the last time they played at Optus. Carlton versus Hawthorn. If you look at how the game went last time they met, you'd have to say Hawthorn, but hopefully Carlton will be better prepared this time around. I'll say Hawthorn win this by 14 points in a much better game than the last one. Tough one. I will actually say the Doggies in this one, 12 points. Essendon versus the Crows at the G. Last time they played Essendon at Marvel, they won narrowly at the end, didn't they? I'll say the Dons. Start the season well. Port versus Richmond. Port should have that pretty comfortably, I would have thought. Saints versus Geelong at Marvel. St Kilda won this late in the season. Would this make Geelong 0-3? Yes, they're 0-2 there. If St Kilda win this, I'm going to tip the Saints. I'll say the Saints win by 18 points. Brisbane, far too good, 50 points over the Eagles. Sorry guys, just a quick intrusion to let you know that this video is brought to you in a paid partnership with BetterHelp, and they're on a mission to make starting therapy easier. I think there are some misconceptions about the value of therapy, and one of those is you need to have a clinical mental health issue like depression or anxiety before you can seek out therapy. I actually think taking the step of seeking therapy and seeking help is actually a sign of strength and self-awareness and helps prevent problems before they arise. And it does take a bit of courage to acknowledge when you need help and taking steps to improve your mental health. So rather than thinking of therapy as something you use when you've got a diagnosed problem, think of therapy as a tool for personal growth. It helps you understand yourself, you can develop healthier habits. It also provides a safe space to talk. Not everyone in their life has someone that they can go to and express to them what's on their mind. Or perhaps there is someone to talk to, but you don't want to deal with the fear of judgment or perhaps feeling like you're a burden to them. And there's also the fact that you'll actually be getting guided help from an expert, a mental health professional. So as I said, as the paid partner of this video, BetterHelp's mission is to help starting therapy for you easier. Starting the process with them is really easy. All you have to do is fill out a questionnaire, and in most cases, you'll be matched with a therapist within a couple of days. If the therapist that you get doesn't feel like the right fit for you, you can easily switch to another one at no additional cost. They are very careful that the therapists that they get are well qualified, and there's also a customer service team if you have any issues. So if you are someone who is struggling and thinks you could benefit from therapy, click the link in the description or go to betterhelp.com/truefooty. You get 10% off your first month. By doing that, you would be supporting the channel, but you also get 10% off your first month with BetterHelp. Thanks guys, let's get back to the video. North versus Melbourne. Ooh, this could be the early season upset for the Roos. I feel like they're going to start well, but they still have a young team. Let's go 14 points in an upset. Fremantle versus the Swans. Last time, Fremantle beat them in Sydney, but Sydney chopped them up at the Optus, but that was right after the passing of Cam McCarthy. Is that a factor here? It probably was. I would say, I think Sydney is better and more talented, but I'm going to say the home side wins that one. Essendon versus Port. Ooh, another tough one. Essendon are dangerous early in the season. We've seen that a couple years in a row, I reckon. I'm going to say Essendon win that by 19. Carlton versus the Bulldogs. Who do you trust more, or who do you trust less? Both teams talented. Both teams probably could have finished higher last year based on their best form. Bulldogs top of the ladder in this current scenario. Geez, this is tough. I'm going to tip the Blues, 10 points. That's a really tough one. Melbourne versus the Suns at the MCG. MCG factor, probably the home side, 18 points. I'm going pretty light with the margins, to be honest. St Kilda versus Richmond. I think St Kilda wins that by 5 goals. I think they're going to be a good team this year. Hawthorn and the Giants down in Tassie. You'd think I'm going to stop making it 18. The Hawks should win a close one. Two good teams. Tassie, tight game, 15 points. On the road, I think the Crows at their best are very hard to beat at Adelaide Oval, so I'm going to say they win by 26 points. Fremantle should start favourite in both derbies. We'll go 23. Collingwood versus Carlton. I'm going to tip the Pies here. I know they were poor last year, but had some really good recruits this year. Houston and Perryman, and maybe a better injury run and certainly better fitness. I think they'll be a team they'll be a hard team to beat this year, and I think I trust them a little bit more than Carlton at this point. They're going to hate that, Blues fans. At GMHBA, the Cats should win this one. This is their first win? Jeez, I still think they're going to be good. It's just the way it's worked out. Gold Coast beat Adelaide in this fixture in opening round last year, and I think they will again. 12 points. Richmond versus the Lions at the MCG. The Lions are pretty good at the MCG. I don't think they have too many concerns now. I'll say at least 5 goals. I might give this one to North. 2 points. That's a boil over, but I'm not trusting Sydney super strongly at the moment. I kind of half expect a poor or inconsistent year from Sydney next year. Again, played deep into finals, made it to the grand final, got pumped. And North will have a bit about them. I don't think North will shoot up the ladder, but let's give them an upset win this early. The Giants versus West Coast. They should easily beat West Coast, I would have thought. 40 points. Port versus St Kilda. Home side should win. I think St Kilda winning against either Adelaide side in Adelaide early would be very impressive, but I'll say the Power. Fremantle, I'm trusting at home against the Bulldogs. The Bulldogs sometimes have their measure, but at Optus, let's say 25 points. Adelaide versus the Cats. I think Geelong won this fixture last year. Yeah, I'll say the Cats will win, 7 points. Okay, we're in gather round now. Collingwood versus Sydney at Adelaide Oval. I was going to say who's better in Adelaide. Sydney's last trip to Adelaide didn't go so well. I'm going to say the Pies. I've got a feeling. North Melbourne versus Gold Coast at Barossa Park. So this will be some regional game. The Gold Coast will have the bigger bodies and the stronger players around the field. I think the Suns win that, 20 points. Carlton should smash West Coast. They always do. Let's go 50 points. Geez, that West Coast percentage is starting to resemble what it has been in recent years. Hopefully that improves. The Bulldogs versus Brisbane at Norwood. I'm going to say Brisbane generally have the Bulldogs measure. Let's go 20 points. These two sides met in Gather Round in 2023 and Essendon had a bit of a boil-over win. I might do that again, 10 points. Again, a lot of teams here I can't really trust but have some talent about them, but I'll say Essendon win this one. Richmond versus Fremantle. Fremantle should easily win that. St Kilda versus the Giants at Norwood. I'm going to give this one to the Saints. It's a neutral venue. I think St Kilda have a bit about them this year and they'll win that one. Semi-final replay. Port Adelaide at the home. I think I'm just going to trust Port Adelaide here to win that one. Brisbane should win at the Gabba against Collingwood. And Carlton versus North. I'll say Carlton win that one. But I think that might be a good game. That's the feeling. West Coast versus Essendon. I think this might be West Coast's first win of the season. Essendon fans are going to hate that. Essendon are hard to beat in the last couple of years, like early in the season. But I think West Coast will click under a home crowd. We saw that last year. They won some random games at home you didn't expect. Tight game, West Coast to win. Melbourne versus Fremantle. Fremantle love playing Melbourne, so easy win for Fremantle. Adelaide and GWS. I think that this is going to be hard to pick. How the hell are GWS 1 and 4? I should be ignoring that, but I've probably done them dirty because I do rate them. I'll say maybe GWS in this one. They do play well at pretty much every venue. Richmond versus Gold Coast at Marvel. Could this be Richmond's first win of the season? I am not convinced. I'll say Gold Coast win by 4 points and have a really good start to the season. Sydney versus Port. I say Sydney win. They won the prelim there by about 5 goals. The Bulldogs and the Saints. At the moment, St Kilda, well, it's 7th versus 14th, but it's only 1 win separating them. I'm actually feeling the doggies. I know this is all over the place, but that is how football goes anyway, right? Geelong versus Hawthorn at the MCG. I think at the MCG, I trust Hawthorn to play really well. Not so much GMHBA, but against the Cats at this ground, I think the Hawks win this one. Melbourne will win against Richmond by 5 goals. I really do think Richmond will struggle early. Will struggle in general. I've got them 0-7, and I just think they've lost too many players to be really competitive. Collingwood versus Essendon. I'm going to say Collingwood win this. Fremantle should beat Adelaide in Perth, 5 goals. St Kilda. I'm loving the Saints at the moment. Mind you, they're only 3-3. I think at Marvel. Specifically Marvel, and I feel like they have a good record against Brisbane. I'm going to say they win this one too. Port too good for North. GWS versus the Bulldogs at Manuka. Let's say the Giants win that one, to be honest. I think they'll get their shit together at some point. Ooh, I feel like the Suns like playing Sydney too. There's been some big upsets between these two sides, and sometimes in Sydney, which this is not. I'm going to go the Suns there by 18 points. Where does that leave Sydney? 9th. Carlton versus Geelong at the MCG. I think that maybe Geelong win that one. 7 points. Hawthorn versus West Coast at Marvel. Now, this is not the MCG, and if it was, I'd tip a bigger loss, but I'd say probably a standard 6-goal win to Hawthorn. Essendon versus North Melbourne. This is winnable for both sides, but I think Essendon, 11 points. St Kilda to beat Fremantle. I really do think St Kilda will be tricky to beat early in the season as well. Bulldogs versus Port at Ballarat. This is at Mars Stadium, isn't it? Eureka. Pretty sure that's the same stadium. Yeah, I'll trust the doggies there at that venue. Adelaide versus Carlton. Tough one. I just don't know which version of Adelaide we're getting next year because the one that was in 2023 would have beaten, and I think did beat, some good teams in Adelaide early in the season, and then just missed out on finals and then took a step back. They have recruited well this offseason, so I just don't know if they're going to click. I'll say Adelaide win this one. Yeah, I'll give that one to Adelaide. Collingwood versus the Cats. This is tricky. Probably Collingwood. West Coast versus Melbourne. I would love to give this to West Coast, but I think Melbourne will be stronger next year, 20 points. Sydney versus the Giants. Home side. I think Sydney beat them 3 times there this year, or 3 times this year in general, 16 points. Hawthorn should be far too good for Richmond. At the Gabba, you say Brisbane win that clash. And then in Perth, I'm going to give this to Fremantle. I think they're going to mature this year. St Kilda and Carlton at the MCG. I'll give this one to Carlton. Melbourne and Hawthorn. Tough one. Have I underrated Melbourne? 4-4. Tough one to predict Melbourne. But I think Hawthorn should win that one. Essendon and Sydney at Marvel Stadium. Again, it just kind of depends which version of either of these teams comes out. I've probably been a little bit harsh on Sydney to start this year, but I think I just have a feeling they're going to be shaky after yet another grand final loss. Well, 2 big ones in 3 years, really. But I'm not sure. I'm not sure about this one. At home, I'll say the Bombers win. These two sides actually do play in a lot of close games too. So I'm going to give this one to Essendon. Gold Coast versus the Western Bulldogs. I'm going to say the Suns. I think this might be a bit of a changing of the guard. I'm rating St Kilda. I'm rating Gold Coast. I'm rating Fremantle. Look, Fremantle on top of the ladder. Oh my God, I really hope that doesn't actually happen. But I just think those are the groups of teams that might just hit that maturity this year. Are they going to win the flag? Probably not, but I'm going to say Gold Coast to win this one and have a really good start to the season. It will change over the course of the video. Port Adelaide versus Adelaide. When these two sides are both good or decent, Adelaide tends to win, don't they? I'm probably going to split them and just give it to the home side in those games. Richmond versus West Coast. I'm sorry to say it, but I think West Coast wins this one. I'm not going to say winless. Richmond are going to be winless this year. That's silly. So far on what I've seen, I think West Coast win this game at the MCG, 5 points. Geelong versus GWS. I'm going to say the Giants probably. They've beaten the Cats at that ground a few times in a row. Maybe not in a row, but in recent years they have. So I'll say the Giants. North Melbourne and Brisbane at Bellerive. Sorry, North fans, I don't think you'll beat Brisbane. I feel like Brisbane normally do a good number in North Melbourne. Gold Coast versus Hawthorn. I think Hawthorn will separate the men from the boys, which is ironic because they're probably going to be younger next year. I'd say Hawthorn though. Sydney to beat Carlton by 20 points. Collingwood at the MCG, tight game, Collingwood win. That is the formula between these two sides. Port and Geelong. Now, Port, I can't remember, did they beat the Cats there? No, they beat the Cats at GMHBA and then the Cats belted them in the qualifying final. I'll still say mid-season, Port Adelaide will do their thing at home. GWS are too good at home. Bulldogs and Essendon. This might be where Bulldogs start to emerge. I'm going to say 20 points. Richmond versus North Melbourne at the MCG. Tell you what, you're going to hate this North fans, but I think this is where I might give Richmond their first win. I think it'll be quirky because North are rated higher than West Coast. So I have West Coast beating Richmond, but I have North Melbourne losing. But I have North Melbourne beating two good teams or two decent teams up to this point. So I think this will be just the quirk where Richmond gets their first win. And that will just be the nature of this season for a few teams. They'll lose the games they should win, particularly the young, inexperienced ones, and then they'll win the games you don't expect them to win. Brisbane should be too good at the Gabba. West Coast versus St Kilda. I think that one will be a decent St Kilda win. Geelong and the Bulldogs. Tough one. The Dogs killed them there last year, but it was also terrible conditions. I'll say Geelong start to move up the ladder with a win there. 4-7. It's an ugly start for Geelong, but I reckon they'll still play finals. Essendon should win this. This should be the Dreamtime game. 26 points. Carlton into the Giants. I'm going to give this one to the Giants. They're just going to be that plucky team that beats teams at random venues, or at least away from home when you don't expect it. Hawthorn at the MCG will be too good for Brisbane, in my opinion. The way they play will probably be able to slice up Brisbane, even though I think Brisbane is the better team. North versus Collingwood. This is where I might win you back because I think North could beat Collingwood in this game. We saw what happened last year. They got like 8 goals in front. I'll go North to shock Collingwood there. Fremantle and Port Adelaide. The final game of the year last year was an absolute ripper where Port just looked a little bit more mature and composed between these two sides, but not a lot separated them. I will say Fremantle, with less on the line in this game, win this game by 14. Adelaide will kill West Coast. They always do. Melbourne versus Sydney at the MCG. Melbourne are in the bottom 4. I don't know how I feel about that, but I don't know who else should be there. I'll say Melbourne. 14 points. They keep this season alive. St Kilda and Gold Coast. I'm going to tip the Saints. I'm backing them in. Brisbane versus Essendon at the Gabba. You got to go the Brisbane Lions. Collingwood versus Hawthorn. Hawthorn like playing Collingwood. They'll win that one. Gold Coast versus Fremantle. Tough away trip for the Fremantle Dockers. I'm going to say Gold Coast win that one. I moved into the top 4. Wow, I'm really backing Dimmer in. But look, I think there's so much talent on that team that it's hard to discount them. GWS versus Richmond. I'm going to say the Giants should win that comfortably. Sydney versus Adelaide. That should be, well, that could be anything, but I'll tip the home side. Melbourne and St Kilda at Triga. Is that Alice Springs? I'll say Melbourne win that one. Geelong will be far too good for West Coast. Bulldogs and Hawthorn. Hawthorn always beat the Bulldogs, don't they? 10 points. Adelaide and Brisbane. Brisbane a second on the ladder. I'll go the home side in an upset there. Good win. Richmond won this fixture last year, but I don't think they'll do it again. 26 points. Geelong and the Gold Coast Suns. I'll say Geelong win. This is where they'll start to ramp up and then move up into 10th. GWS and Port Adelaide at Manuka go the home side by 22 points. North versus West Coast in Bunbury. I'm going to say that at a kind of neutral venue, just with an Eagles crowd, you'd think. I'll say North win that in a narrow game, 5 points. Carlton versus Essendon. You got to go Carlton, I think. This is where Essendon start to disappoint. Will it happen again? Who knows? Melbourne versus Collingwood. I'm going to tip the Pies in that one. Secured in the Bulldogs is tough because, wow, look at the Bulldogs do not deserve to be in the bottom four. But I do think they will be inconsistent. This might be one of those games where the Bulldogs win and flex some muscle. And that's kind of the story with the Bulldogs. You see, when they're at their best, they're really impressive, but they're inconsistent. So they'll win. And you just see, like, as the ladder's moving around there, the wins, one win fluctuates the ladder so much. So I probably wouldn't put too much stock into that right now. Hawthorn versus Adelaide, tight game in Tassie. Hawthorn wins. Brisbane, too good for the Giants, are we saying? They were too good for them in the semi. They might not be. Yeah, no, we'll go the Brisbane Lions. Essendon versus Geelong. I'd be pretty surprised if Essendon win that one. This is where Geelong are starting to gain some momentum. North hosting Fremantle at Optus Stadium. It's essentially a Fremantle home game. You'd imagine the crowd is still going to be heavily Fremantle. And I think Fremantle win that one. Port should be too good for Melbourne. What happened last year? I remember it being a tight game early in the season. And I think that Melbourne won. I actually don't remember. Either way, it was a close game. I'd say Port should win this one. West Coast versus Carlton. Gross. No, we hate playing Carlton. 40 points. Fremantle versus Essendon. I'd say Fremantle 14. Geelong, GMHBA. This could be a good game. I'm going to say that the Cats win 5 points. Carlton should beat North. I think I gave North the win earlier in the season, but they won't win too. Port Adelaide versus Sydney. Some horrific scars at this ground for Sydney at this opponent, but we'll say 20 points. Collingwood versus St Kilda. I'm going to back in the Pies. I think that should be too good. And look, they just went from 9th to 4th. So GWS and the Gold Coast Suns go home side better. Bulldogs should be too good for Richmond. I think they have the capacity to really have a big win there, 47. Collingwood should be far too good for West Coast. Richmond and Adelaide at the MCG. Now, Richmond beat them in Adelaide last year as one of their only 2 wins. But I think Adelaide win this one this time. Gold Coast and Melbourne. A lot of this will depend on, like, does this game mean a lot? I suppose in round 16 it's still going to mean something, but Melbourne are 6 and 8. Like, what are they doing? Are they playing the kids? Probably not. Let's ignore that anyway. Yeah, I'd say the Gold Coast Suns. I think they should be reliable next year. Sydney and the Bulldogs, that should be a Swans win. 7 points. Mind you, hang on. The Bulldogs slaughtered them there last year, didn't they? I'll give that one to Sydney. Hawthorn in Tassie should be far too good for North Melbourne. Port Adelaide and Carlton. This one could be an upset for Carlton here, but I'll say home side. They're too good. Fremantle and the Saints at Optus Stadium. Geez, I've got Fremantle high, don't I? But I think they will be reliable at home, so they'll win that one. Geelong should smash Richmond. St Kilda and Hawthorn. Tough one. Wow, Hawthorn have only lost 2 games in this instance. I don't even think I rated them that highly, but I'll still say Hawthorn there. North and the Bulldogs. I'll say the Bulldogs win that one. Essendon and Gold Coast. Essendon will get revenge after that Mac Andrew result last year, 18 points. Carlton and Collingwood at the MCG. Let's split them this time. I think Carlton wins the second one. Fremantle and the Swans. Yeah, we'll go Sydney. I know that Fremantle are good at this ground and against this opponent, but I'll say Sydney narrowly. It was only 1 point last year. Brisbane will be far too good for Port in that game. Adelaide against Melbourne. They'll get the chocolates. GWS will win comfortably in Perth. And then they host Geelong at Sydney, so I'll say the Giants again. The Bulldogs at Ballarat, yeah, they'll beat Adelaide. St Kilda and Sydney, I'll say the Saints win for the 2nd time in a row. Carlton versus Brisbane at Marvel. That one being at Marvel makes it interesting. I would have probably tipped Carlton not comfortably, but I would have tipped them more confidently at the MCG. And at Marvel, yeah, I'll say Carlton win that one, 6 points. This was tight last year, wasn't it? And it's a bottom 4 clash. I think Melbourne win. Richmond and Essendon the 2nd time around. Do I give this win to Richmond? Essendon fans are going to hate it if I do, but maybe I do. Yeah, they'll get another upset win, Richmond here. And West Coast moving to last, fantastic. Carlton versus Collingwood. Yeah, they'll be too good at home. They're a good home side, the Gold Coast Suns. Port will smash West Coast. Fremantle and Hawthorn. Oh, that's a tough one. And a top 2 clash. Oh, am I comfortable with Hawthorn being 15-2 if they beat Fremantle here? I will say Fremantle win. Geelong and St Kilda at GMHBA, Geelong win. Essendon and the Giants. I say the Giants play well in that game. Carlton beats Melbourne. Collingwood versus Fremantle at the MCG. This would be a big clash, but I'm going to tip the home side. Sydney and North. I think Sydney could actually flex some muscle in that game. I think that this one could be an upset. I think I might give this the upset to the Bulldogs. They are going to be that sort of team once again. They always are. Hawthorn and Port. These 2 sides have played some good games, haven't they? In Tassie, I'll give Hawthorn the narrow win. Adelaide versus Gold Coast. Let's give this one to the Crows. West Coast versus Richmond. Sorry, Richmond, but I think West Coast wins this one. And that will be their third win of the year. I'll say West Coast win that one. GWS and Sydney probably go the home side. North and Geelong, the fact that it's Marvel gives North a sniff, but I think Geelong always beat them. St Kilda and Melbourne, I'll give this one to St Kilda. Essendon and the Bulldogs, late season Bulldogs form versus late season Essendon form. You'd have to go the Bulldogs. Richmond and Collingwood, comfortably Collingwood. Hawthorn should beat Carlton, you'd think. It was not a good game last time they met. Gold Coast to upset them in their home Q clash, I reckon. And then I said I'd split the showdown, so that makes it like that. Fremantle win both derbies. Geelong versus Port at GMHBA will be interesting. Port won there last year. I'll say Geelong win this one, 11 points. St Kilda beat North. Melbourne beat West Coast. That one's a tricky one. Just because in this scenario, Melbourne are not a good team, but I'd say they win that one. The Bulldogs and the Giants at Marvel. This will go to... It would be so typical of the Bulldogs to lose this one. I think I'm going to tip the Giants. Collingwood will win this game at the MCG, similar to how they did last year, or this year rather, and last year. Gold Coast should beat Richmond, 25 points. Sydney by late season will be too good for Essendon. Oh dear. I'm going to say Adelaide win this one, actually. They're pretty good in the big games at home. Obviously last year wasn't great, but... I think they'll return to being a lot more formidable at this ground, and Hawthorn lose. Fremantle versus Carlton. Now, this is 2nd versus 8th, and Carlton have this knack for just breaking Fremantle hearts. Do we do it again? Would it be funny? I think it would. In all seriousness, though, I think Fremantle, to be honest, if I'm being fair. Geelong, at GMHBA, they'll win that one. Yeah, and at Manuka, the Giants win that one. Carlton should beat the Gold Coast Suns, and St Kilda beat Richmond. So where's St Kilda now? 11th with a positive ledger. So that's interesting. Like, you can have 10 and 10 this year and be 13th so far. Melbourne and the Bulldogs. I think I'm going to go the Bulldogs. I'm really not showing a lot of faith in Melbourne here, am I? Hawthorn versus Collingwood. Hawthorn likes playing Collingwood. They'll win this one. Brisbane Lions at the Gabba should beat the Sydney Swans, you'd think. Grand final rematch. Port Adelaide versus Fremantle. Tough away game, and I think Port Adelaide will be reliable at home anyway. West Coast and Adelaide could be a good game, but you'd say Adelaide by 26. Melbourne versus Richmond at Bellerive. I think North collect their 5th win of the season there. Essendon versus St Kilda. This would be tricky. I'm not really comfortable with the 14th and 15th positions on this ladder, or 13th for that matter. I think the Saints will go marching in. Bulldogs will absolutely slap West Coast. Carlton and Port Adelaide at Marvel. Over Carlton. Hawthorn and Melbourne. Hawthorn should win that one. Gold Coast and GWS. Very tough one. Do we trust Gold Coast to be reliable at the end of the season? Maybe not. They're playing a very good team. Sydney versus Geelong at the SCG rather. I'll say the Cats win that one. Adelaide versus Collingwood. This could be a good game. But I'll say the upset home win again. Adelaide coming up with a bit of momentum here. Fremantle should beat the Brisbane Lions at Perth. I think they would in this scenario. GWS should beat St Kilda, but let's go 2 points. North versus Adelaide at Marvel Stadium. With Adelaide got an eye on finals, North Melbourne chasing their 6th win. I'll say Adelaide win. 4 points. Bulldogs and Fremantle at Marvel. Geez, look at the Bulldogs now. Earlier in the video, I probably had Bulldogs fans probably turning off because they were so far down. But I feel like in Melbourne, the Bulldogs generally play well against Fremantle, and I think they'll win this one, 21 points. Collingwood and Melbourne, I think I'll trust Collingwood with that one. Geelong far too good for Richmond. Essendon and Carlton. Let's go the upset in that one. Essendon. At the Gabba, I think I trust Brisbane to beat the Hawks, but at the MCG, I returned the favour, and I think Hawthorn will win at the MCG, but at the Gabba, let's go the Brisbane Lions. Port and Gold Coast at Adelaide Oval. Away from home, I expect the Gold Coast will fumble that. Oh God, Sydney to smash West Coast, regardless of the form. So that's the last game of the season. So what outcomes we got here? I haven't really been looking at the ladder too much. Hawthorn to top the ladder. I wouldn't have had Hawthorn as my top team if you'd asked me beforehand. GWS in 2nd. I am a little bit of a GWS fan in the sense that I rate them. Fremantle in 3rd might seem weird, but I think there's an argument to be made for this year being the one where they mature. And they have Shea Bolton. I think they will be a good team this year. Geelong in 4th, comfortable with that. It happens most years. The Bulldogs, Collingwood, Brisbane and Carlton slide into the 8th. So none of that is too obscene. Adelaide in 9th would be good improvement, although it'd be sad for them to miss the finals, especially if they're 13 and 10. Sydney miss out, so that's probably a call that I hadn't really decided in my head was going to happen, but I suppose I'm not feeling confident about their capacity to play well next year, but I obviously could be wrong. St Kilda in 11th, I thought they might end up higher. Port Adelaide in 12th seems wrong. I don't think I'll have Port Adelaide missing my top 8 when I actually do my ladder prediction. Gold Coast in 13th, how does this happen again? Start the year well, fade away late. That would be really disappointing for them if that played out. Melbourne in 14th does seem wrong. Same thing with Essendon, but if I'm being honest, I think those bottom 3 are right and in the correct order, but I'm not sure who should be the other bottom 4 side. It's going to be about which team fumbles this year. In this scenario, it's Essendon. I'm not convinced it's going to happen in reality, but it's just a fun video, so let's move down to the finals. Hawks and the Cats as the MCG qualifying final, and then the Bulldogs and Carlton in the elimination final, a grand final rematch in the elimination final, and the Giants and Fremantle at NG Stadium it should be. So let's work through these. In a big final, I'm going to say the Cats, the mature team. Hawthorn is still pretty young. The Bulldogs and Carlton, I'm going to trust the Bulldogs there. Sorry, Carlton fans. Brisbane to exact revenge for a couple losses at the MCG against Collingwood in a row. GWS versus Fremantle, I'll tip the Giants. So that leaves Hawthorn and the Bulldogs, another semi-final rematch of the elimination final, and Fremantle hosting Brisbane at Optus. I'm going to say Hawthorn win and Fremantle win, which gives us Geelong versus Fremantle in the prelim and GWS versus Hawthorn. Geez, that's hot. That's real tasty. I think that I might go... Oh, that's tough. Geelong and Fremantle. I feel like Fremantle play well against Geelong, but this is the MCG. The MCG, I'll go the Cats. And the Giants versus Hawthorn, this will be in Sydney. I'm torn here. I might go the Giants. Who wins the grand final? I'm going to do it again. I'm going to say the Giants win the grand final. That's a tough one, though. I think I'm pretty comfortable with those 4. Hawthorn, I wouldn't be surprised if they have a good season in the home and away year. In the finals, just being a young team, maybe having a bit of that fatigue. I think there's an argument for that. I think Fremantle is maturing, and, had they not had a bad month at the end of last year, the top 4 was still a possibility. So I think I'm comfortable with that. I think Geelong being good is not something I'm not confident in. I think they'll be around the mark again, and it just comes down to how they go in the finals. And similarly for the Giants, they're still a great team with a lot of experience. And yeah, there we go. That was just a little bit of fun, guys. Let me know in the comments how much you hated it. Again, I wouldn't hold me too tightly to this as my prediction. This is just the way I saw it going game by game, and that's arguably the worst way you can do this prediction. So keep an eye out for another video soon where I actually, put some more analysis into this. This was a bit more fun, but for now, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.